I had been on the bench for over 3 decades, and in all those years, I thought I had witnessed every kind of arrogance a courtroom could attract. I had seen wealthy businessmen attempt to intimidate witnesses, attorneys twist facts until they barely resembled the truth, and desperate defendants beg for mercy, with tears that vanished the moment the hearing ended. But nothing in those 30 years prepared me for what happened that Wednesday morning. "Judge, let's act like reasonable adults here. You rule in my favor, and I'll make sure this courthouse finally receives the renovation funding it's been waiting on. You make things difficult for me, and I'll make sure that funding disappears." That's not a threat. That's simply how cities operate. The moment those words left his mouth, the entire courtroom froze. Those weren't the words of a nervous defendant overwhelmed by traffic court. They weren't spoken by someone who misunderstood procedure or courtroom etiquette. They came from the elected mayor of this city. The same man whose face appeared at every ribbon-cutting ceremony, every campaign poster, every speech promising fairness and progress to the people who trusted him. And he spoke those words directly to me before I had even reviewed the first page of the case file. That moment tested far more than patience. It forced a question every courtroom in this country exists to answer. Does the law still apply equally, no matter who stands before the bench? If you believe the answer should always be yes, then what happened next matters. That morning, I was halfway through the docket when Mayor Michael Harrison entered the courtroom. 54 years old. Expensive charcoal suit tailored to perfection. 2 assistants trailing behind him while typing on their phones. Beside him stood his attorney, a man carrying the exhausted expression of someone who had likely spent years cleaning up after his client's behavior. The mayor never bothered taking a seat. He walked straight to the front, dropped a thick folder onto the prosecution table, glanced at his watch twice, then casually informed me that the matter should take no more than 15 minutes, and that I should keep the city's larger interests in mind. While reviewing the evidence, I slowly removed my glasses and placed them on the bench. Across the aisle sat Sarah Mitchell, 72 years old, small-framed, wearing an old cardigan that looked like it had accompanied her through every important moment of her adult life. Her hands rested carefully in her lap, folded tightly together. She looked frightened, but she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone determined not to let fear humiliate her in public. Sarah Mitchell had operated the same alteration shop on the same corner for 38 years. In just the previous 10 days, her business had suddenly received 7 city violations. And the man standing in front of me was the reason for every single one. The bailiff called the case. Sarah stood immediately, carefully pushing herself up with the cautious movement of someone whose knees had long ago begun protesting cold mornings and hard chairs. She stood respectfully, the way people stand when they still believe a courtroom deserves respect. Mayor Harrison remained seated. He leaned back casually, crossed one leg over the other, and looked at me with the relaxed confidence of a man who had already decided how the hearing would end. Then he addressed me by my first name. "Not Your Honor, not Judge, my first name." "This should move quickly," he said impatiently. "I have a press conference at noon." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence sit in the room. 6 seconds, then 8. His attorney leaned toward him and whispered urgently into his ear. The kind of whisper given by someone who already knew disaster was approaching and no longer possessed the tools to stop it. Finally, Harrison stood slowly, dramatically, like a man forced into an inconvenience he believed himself above. He adjusted his jacket and announced, "I'm here to ensure this court finally deals with the nuisance sitting on one of the city's most valuable development corridors." He tilted his head toward Sarah without fully looking at her. Like she was an obstacle, not a person. The courtroom remained silent, no whispers, no shifting chairs. Nothing except the soft blinking of the courtroom camera, recording every second of what was unfolding. The mayor believed he had walked into a routine proceeding. He had not. I opened the folder he had provided and began reading each citation carefully. Violation 1. A worn awning. No engineering report, no structural inspection, no evidence of danger whatsoever. Just a checked box describing it as frayed. Violation 2. A sign exceeding permitted dimensions by 2 inches. No documented measurement method. No identified measuring instrument. Violations 3 through 6 involved vague maintenance concerns and pedestrian obstruction complaints submitted anonymously within the same 48-hour window. I looked toward the city inspector seated in the third row, Robert Blake. He was attempting the kind of forced stillness people use when desperately hoping not to be noticed. It failed. "Mr. Blake," I said, "did you personally inspect every violation listed here?" "Yes, Your Honor," he replied immediately, but his voice lacked certainty. It sounded rehearsed. "The awning," I continued. "Did you determine it posed an actual structural hazard?" A pause. "No, Your Honor. It appeared visually worn. And the signage violation. How exactly did you determine the dimensions exceeded city code?" Another pause, longer this time. "I estimated using a measuring tape." "Can you identify even one of the anonymous complainants?" He could not. I closed the folder. The silence inside the courtroom changed at that moment. Earlier, it had been the silence of attention. Now it became the silence of realization. The silence people fall into when paperwork that looked official suddenly begins collapsing under simple questions. Then Harrison leaned forward impatiently. "The investors involved in this project can't afford delays," he snapped. There it was, 4 words that explained everything. The citations had never truly been about an awning or a sign. They were about a piece of property sitting on a corner. Developers wanted badly enough to weaponize city enforcement against a 72-year-old woman. I turned toward Sarah. "In the 38 years you've operated your business," I asked gently, "had you ever received a violation before these past 10 days? Her voice was soft but steady. "Never, Your Honor. Not once." The courtroom absorbed that quietly. Then I looked back toward the mayor. "Mayor Harrison," I said calmly, "if this business belonged to your mother, if she had spent 38 years opening her shop at 6 every morning without a single citation, would your office have sent inspectors after her?" He opened his mouth, then stopped. For several long seconds, he searched desperately for an answer that would avoid the truth without openly exposing it. Nothing came. The silence stretched across the courtroom. Then the doors opened. A man entered carrying a thick manila folder. He approached the clerk's desk and introduced himself as James Donovan, owner of a nearby print shop and former city planning analyst. "I filed public records requests last week," he explained. "I believe these documents are relevant." I allowed him to proceed. He opened the folder carefully, like a man fully aware that facts require no dramatic presentation. The development agreement between the city and Harrove Capital Group had been signed exactly 11 days before Sarah Mitchell received her first violation. The inspector assigned to Sarah's district had been transferred there. During the same week, the development project was approved. The transfer had not been requested. And there were internal city emails originating directly from the mayor's office, instructing code enforcement to document compliance concerns, specifically on Sarah Mitchell's block, not the district, not the corridor. That exact block. James Donovan explained he had attempted to report these findings internally days earlier and had been ignored. So he brought them to court instead. I informed him he had made the correct decision. The documents were admitted into evidence. That was when Mayor Harrison lost control. He rose without permission and began accusing the court of political bias, judicial overreach, and interference with the city's economic future. He pointed aggressively toward James Donovan. Toward me, toward the evidence. I allowed him to finish. Verklempt outbursts are often far more revealing than interrupted ones. When he finally stopped, I calmly returned to writing my order. I dismissed all 7 violations individually, citing both procedural and substantive deficiencies in each citation. I ordered Sarah Mitchell's business license fully reinstated immediately. All violations were expunged from her record. I referred the code enforcement conduct for investigation, and I forwarded the development documentation to the State Attorney General's office for independent review. Then I signed the order. Mayor Harrison's face had turned bright red. His attorney, Emily Carter, had spent the entire hearing trying to disappear into the background. Until now, she had remained silent. Finally, she stood and submitted a 3-page legal opinion claiming a municipal judge lacked authority to refer evidentiary matters to the Attorney General without City Council approval. I examined the document. "Who authored this opinion?" I asked. She gave a name from the city legal department. "When Was it officially filed? She hesitated. It was prepared in anticipation of today's proceedings. Can you provide the filing reference number? She could not. Does this document exist anywhere in the city's public legal records? Another pause. It did not. A legal opinion produced specifically for the hearing, by an office controlled by the mayor. With no filing record whatsoever, that was enough. I cited Mayor Michael Harrison for direct contempt of court, for interrupting proceedings, for attempting to intimidate the court, and for presenting documentation whose legitimacy could not be verified. 5 days in county custody. Effective immediately, the bailiff moved toward him. For the first time all morning, the confidence vanished completely from Harrison's face. No tailored suit could hide what appeared underneath it then. Fear, the story did not end there. By that evening, courtroom footage had spread across every local news station. James Donovan's records reached the Attorney General's office the next morning. The development deal, the emails, the suspicious inspector transfer, all of it became front-page news across the city. 5 days later, the courtroom filled again. This time with shop owners, local residents, and people who came forward revealing anonymous complaints had been filed in their names without permission. Sarah Mitchell sat quietly in the front row, wearing the same cardigan. James Donovan sat beside her. Then the side door opened. Mayor Harrison walked in wearing a gray county-issued jumpsuit. No assistants, no attorney, no confidence. He looked exhausted. For the first time since entering my courtroom, he looked directly at Sarah Mitchell instead of through her, and he apologized. Not like a politician managing public relations, not with rehearsed lines, but awkwardly, honestly. Like a man who had spent 5 days stripped of his title, his staff, his phone, and every illusion protecting him from himself. He admitted he had stopped seeing Sarah as a person. He saw only a corner developers wanted. Sarah listened quietly for a long moment. Then she gave a single small nod. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. One human being finally recognizing another. State investigators later charged Harrison with abuse of office, procurement fraud, and interference with civil proceedings. At the courtroom door, before deputies escorted him away, he stopped and looked back. I forgot what the job was supposed to be, he said quietly. Then he left. The next morning, Sarah Mitchell opened her shop again at 6 o'clock. Exactly the way she had for 38 years. And after thinking about that morning many times since, I believe one truth deserves to be said clearly. This story is not about opposing success or power. Cities grow. Development happens. Change is inevitable. The real issue is what happens when the machinery of government, inspectors, legal offices, code enforcement divisions, stop serving the public and start serving private interests instead. Sarah Mitchell never asked for special treatment. She only asked for the same law everyone else receives. And that is the only promise this courtroom exists to protect. I have sat on this bench for more than 30 years. I will sit here tomorrow, and as long as I do, nobody, not a wealthy developer, not a powerful attorney, and not a mayor with money to threaten people with, will stand above the law inside this courtroom. So